Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to Mind Hostage, a show where real people discuss real issues of overcoming negativity and a negative mindset. I'm your host, Stephen Payne, and I'm glad to be here with you today. Today's episode is brought to you by CBD 911, distributors of some of the purest CBD on the planet. With a 60-day empty bottle money-back guarantee, their CBD is certified organic, non-GMO. You can visit them at www.mycbd911.com. All right, thank you, Mind Hostage fans, for tuning in today. We're going to have an interview with Kent Meyer, who is a former EMT paramedic and is founder of Project Hope EMS. Kent, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Kent, having spent almost 30 years in the emergency medical service industry myself, I feel like this is a topic that is important to a lot of people, not only within the industry, but for those who are, family and friends and just the general public to know that the people who lay their life on the line every day may be suffering.
Yeah, I believe there's a lot of, I don't want to call it ignorance, but lack of education as to what first responders go through on a daily basis and see, and the suffering that goes on in silence. And I think that's changing. I think there's more awareness going on, and I think the word's getting out there slowly. But yeah, there's a lot of unknown out there as far as the general public goes.
I think some of it has to do with it's just kind of an expectation. It's something you do. You dial 911 when you need someone, whether it be law enforcement or the fire department or EMS, and you dial the numbers and somebody shows up, and a lot of times there's not a whole lot of thought that goes into what makes that happen. What makes somebody show up at your door when you dial 911, and it's kind of like going to the store nowadays where everything's automatic. You don't have to open a door. You just walk up to it and it opens up and things happen, and I think we tend to take those things for granted.
Yeah, and people see us as and label us as heroes, and actually we're just ordinary people, and doing extraordinary things and seeing extraordinary things, and being regular people that has an effect, and that's the downside of it.
Well, Ken, do you mind sharing with our listeners how prevalent that PTSD is amongst our first responders?
There's 20% of the people who are exposed to trauma, first responders who are exposed to trauma, will get PTSD. That's equivalent to a tour in Iraq. A lot of people hear PTSD, they think of military, they don't think of first responders getting PTSD. And I have some statistics. The statistics in the U.S. aren't that great because they're very focused, and they focus on certain events. And like Canada's light years ahead of us, and they have like all-inclusive statistics. But America is kind of behind the ball on first responders and PTSD, so we don't have really great statistics. But we do have some general statistics that are true and hold water. But just to give people an idea of what first responders are dealing with, so like suicide in the U.S. is the 10th leading cause of death. Lifetime attempts is 8.7% in the U.S. for the average person. But for first responders, it's 15.5%. So that's double what it is for the average person. The suicidal ideation for the average person is 14.3%, but for first responders, it's 46.8%.
So for those that don't know, that suicidal ideation is just that you feel like or want or have thoughts of actually committing the act of suicide. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So clearly, first responders are at a higher risk than the general public to for suicide and to get PTSD. That's that's about it in a nutshell for statistics. I have some more as we go along that'll pertain to topics that we talk about.
Okay. Well, and I think something to keep in mind for our listeners is that there are a number of factors that affect these statistics, and maybe why they're not very accurate, and why that the incident rate of PTSD in first responders may be different, and some of those revolve around maybe the area that you work, being the call volume, because remember, these are repeated traumas,
Mm-hmm.
where responders respond to multiple calls per shift, and so some of that varies in the call volumes, the number of calls on average that the first responders respond to every day, and then the type of incidents that they respond to, and it could be one incident, or it could be a cumulative result
Yeah.
of multiple incidents per day. That's one thing. And there's, because something you said a while ago is very, very important, and that's that we're real people too. First responders are real people, and so there are real people issues to consider, such as background and culture, and childhood experiences, and many different factors that play into how different incidents throughout your career could affect you differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but uh, a lot of these incidents, suicide or PTSD, aren't reported. You may have somebody who was a paramedic who has PTSD but never got diagnosed due to the stigma, and I think we're going to discuss what the stigma is here in a little bit. And then he goes to work in a factory later and then winds up committing suicide. Well, it doesn't get reported because it looks like he just committed suicide while he was working in the industry, but not as a first responder. And there's places that don't report it; they almost cover it up. It's a brotherhood. They don't want to tarnish them or drag their name through the mud, so to speak. But the fact is, and I know this is true for firefighters and police officers, EMS, by the way, emergency medical services, is probably the most underreported as far as statistics. But firefighters and police officers die more by suicide than they do in the line of duty.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pain. We talked about EMS, fire, and police collectively. That the incident of suicide is at least twice that of the general public,
Mm-hmm.
and it's underreported. So yeah, we will discuss kind of some of the stigma behind that, and maybe why that's underreported, and of course what we can do to improve awareness. But those stats being said, what are some of the signs and symptoms in people who are struggling with PTSD in general, but particularly here for our first responders?
Well, and that's just it. There's a lot of first responders who are going through the symptoms of PTSD, but they don't know they have PTSD, so they don't know. So it's good for them to hear it too, as well as the public. There's a lot of symptoms, but we'll cover some of them. It's kind of broken down into three major categories. The first one is re-experiencing symptoms, like through nightmares or flashbacks, or they're fixated on the past or the event that has brought them to PTSD. They may have psychotic episodes where suddenly they feel like they're somewhere else experiencing some sort of trauma. It could have panic attacks or phobias. And the second category is avoidance symptoms. Isolation is probably the biggest thing you'll see in PTSD as a symptom. The person isolates himself from friends and family. And that's like a major red flag right there. In that category falls like anxiety in crowds or traffic, despair, depression, very reluctant to talk about traumatic events, lack of interest or motivation, former hobbies, things like that, no interest in things that they used to have interest in, substance abuse, which is a big unhealthy coping skill that people with PTSD adopt. And I feel is due a lot to the stigma. The third category is arousal symptoms. You'll see anger and irritability, hypervigilance. And so, those who don't know what hypervigilance is, it's where sounds are a lot louder than what they seem like, and they affect you in a scary way, like a car backfiring, or it could be a dog barking or somebody yelling, or you're just more susceptible to noises. And again, substance abuse is under that category. That's a big one. There's a lot more, but I mean, we don't have time to cover them all. But
Sure. Well, yeah, and, I think for folks, whether you be a provider and you need to hear this, and there are some symptoms that you have that maybe you haven't recognized or accepted yet, or you're a friend or a family member. These are things to be aware of, and I think there are characteristics that may be present that people may not have linked to PTSD that are fairly common in the industry, such as you mentioned alcohol or substance abuse, where you may have a friend or you may be or have a history of being in the public safety industry, and people look at you like you're just maybe a party animal, right? The guy that goes out and drinks a lot, and could be the life of the party for some, but it's that your focus is on alcohol frequently. For others, that you may drink in private, and they don't, like you said, they don't like to get out and socialize, and so they may just be labeled as kind of an antisocial person, whereas they may normally not be antisocial, but that's a symptom of an underlying problem. It could be that you're having trouble in relationships, where it's just labeled as him being whatever you may label him as, just difficult to get along with, or maybe just a kind of a downer or a negative type, personality. There's just a number of different labels that I think people can have that people don't recognize as being symptoms of a bigger problem.
yeah, I think a lot of people, well, sometimes they'll say, I think I'm just burnout, or I think I'm just depressed. And yeah, there's a lot of things that look like or can mask what PTSD, but the truth of the matter is a lot of these other things like burnout or depression can lead to PTSD if not having some sort of intervention. And speaking of self-medicating, the first responders, instead of reaching out for help, they tend to self-medicate to numb themselves. And it's first responders with PTSD who self-medicate are 2 to 4 times more likely to become addicted to whatever their drug of choice is.
Well,
So,
what goes along with that is there's also a high incidence of injury in this public safety industry. There's a high incident rate of back and shoulder and knee, and you can imagine just a ton of different uh, opportunities for injury, and opportunities to be prescribed opiate type medications,
Mm-hmm.
which then could turn into, hey, I've got a legit reason to be taking these particular medications, and very quickly lead to abuse.
Yes. And I've been there. I've had two back surgeries, and uh, so I was on some pretty heavy drugs there for a while. And yeah, it's easy to justify in your mind that this is okay, but you're taking it for the wrong reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. Likewise. After a lumbar fusion, a couple spinal injuries and multiple joint surgeries. For me, I had to very, very quickly get that in check.
Hmm.
And I don't think we're unique. We know many people, and as a matter of fact, it's probably more difficult to find somebody who doesn't have a previous injury in the public safety industry,
Yeah.
first responder industry.
Well, it's hard on the body. No sleep at night, the poor diet, lack of exercise, lifting improperly because you don't have a choice, and lifting more than you should. And yeah, it's kind of hard not to get injured along the way.
Well, the physical injuries are one thing that's easy for people to see, though. If I'm struggling to walk because my back is hurting, and you can look at the grimace on my face, and how I'm struggling to walk, or if I have a brace on my knee and require a crutch to move because of an injury, or if you have a bandage or something, people can look at you and see that something's going on.
Hmm.
I think something that's really important to understand is you can't always see mental injury.
No, and people always treat it that way too, or treat it differently. Um, so if you had back surgery, people would be coming over to help you do things around the house. You'd be getting cards, you'd be getting phone calls, you'd be getting all sorts of support. But then if you come down with PTSD or a mental illness, most times there is no phone calls. There is nobody coming over to check on you. There, because people are not educated about mental illness, and they're afraid of it, and they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing, or they don't know what to say, and so they just stay clear. But it's no different. Mental illness is, or injury, if you want to call it that, is no different than a physical injury. You go to the doctor, you get seen for it, you get treated for it, and it's really no different. 4 out of 5 adults in America have some sort of mental illness. So it's not like mental illness is a unique thing where you're a select few of crazy people. 4 out of 5 adults in the U.S. have some sort of mental illness. This is a regular thing for America. It's normal, and mental illness needs to be viewed as a normalcy and not an issue or a problem that should be treated like uh, leprosy or something like that.
Right, right. Well, I think one of the things that goes along with that, and we'll talk more about stigma, in a little bit, but something an old wise man told me one time, and we were just having a discussion, and I was complaining and yakking about some issue that I had going on at work or in my personal life, and they just looked at me with those calm, cool eyes, and smiled, real gently, and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Aren't you glad you don't own all the world's problems?" And I thought, man, it really kind of hit me at that point. But what happens is that each of us individually are going through our own issues in life, and so it's easy for us to think that ours are worse than someone else's, or whatever. And when you see somebody else struggling, you write it off as, well, they just need to deal with it. And although we may be going through something similar, there are many, many different factors that could affect us each differently. And so, one of the things that I think we need to be a little bit more sensitive to is the fact that whatever you're going through right now is important to you. And we shouldn't write it off so quickly as, somebody's just weak, or, they just have a difficulty coping or whatever, because you can't possibly know,
No.
what they've gone through in the past, what they're going through now. And then not only that, but our individual makeup as people make us very, very different and respond to things different. It doesn't mean that you are stronger than somebody or they're weaker. It just means we're different.
Because, like you said, well, trauma affects people differently. I mean, me and you may go out on the same call, but it may not affect you, but it affects me. And it's just like you said, our makeup, we're different people. We've been through different things, and we may have had other things happen that built up to that, but we can't. You see that where people say, well, I was there too. I don't understand why you have a problem with it. It's not a competition. Different people have different reactions, and we have to recognize that.
Well, and it could be that it may not affect them right now,
Right.
but like as for myself, I was really good at kind of locking things away and putting them behind me, or so I thought. And you lock those things away, or compartmentalize those individual traumas, and think it doesn't affect you until it starts to leak out later, and it will. The analogy I use is kind of like, matter of fact, I just read in the news the other day where we had a kind of a nuclear waste depository where they locked this nuclear waste away and seal it up in containers, and they put it inside another container that's lined, and they bury it deep in the earth, but eventually it's going to eat its way through those containers, and it's going to start to leach out. And I think that's what happens to people that think they've got it locked away, or that it may not affect them now, is that eventually those things could leach out. For some, maybe it doesn't. Maybe they've developed a good coping mechanism, or it really didn't bother them. But I think more often than not, people fool themselves into thinking that it doesn't. And it could be that that's the hero in us, and that we don't want to accept and admit that something bothers us.
Well, I know I did that too. I locked things away, and because they don't teach you they don't teach you coping skills in school, in any of the schools, fire, police, EMS. They just tell you some things that could happen, and you should get help, and that's about it. I think in the class, 5 slides cover the whole thing, and it's a poor coping skill, and I know a lot of first responders do that, and that's what happens. It's like a volcano. Eventually, it erupts, and it's not a good thing.
Well, Kit, that being said, would you mind sharing a little bit about how maybe some of these things have affected you personally?
Sure. So I was in EMS for 14 years, and I've seen a lot of things, and it took one call. I've been on other calls like it, but for some reason that call really bothered me, and I started to struggle with it. It was a burn patient, and I started having nightmares, and shortly I struggled with that for a couple of years. And then after that, my mother passed away, and that was like the final blow. It opened the floodgates for whatever reason, and calls that I had forgotten about, that I had stuffed away, had come back and were haunting me in my sleep and nightmares. So I wasn't sleeping because I didn't want to sleep, because I didn't want the nightmares. I was starting to have flashbacks. I was hallucinating due to lack of sleep. I isolated from friends and family, and I didn't know what was going on. PTSD never crossed my mind, and never really knew much about PTSD at that time. other than the military. And I thought I was losing my mind. I was reluctant to reach out for help because I didn't want, well, because of the stigma, which, we can talk about, but uh, I didn't want people to think less of me. And, as first responders, we look at ourselves as the helper, and we shouldn't need help because we're the ones that help people. And I know the first responders know, but like the general public don't know. On some of these scenes that we go on, it's just utter chaos. And we are calm and cool. We may be freaking out on the inside, but we maintain composure, and we command the area. We calm the family that's upset because of a loved one that's hurt. We're landing helicopters. We're calling for extra ambulances. We're dealing with all these things, and we do it well. But then all of a sudden, when we're by ourselves at home and we're having flashbacks and nightmares, and it's like, I'm one person. Why can't I manage what's going on with me when I can take care of all these things on a chaotic scene? And I should be able to handle what's going on with me. Finally, I fell into a deep depression. My self-esteem was so low. I never have felt so low in all my life. And I tried to commit suicide. I cut my wrist. My boss found me, and they rushed me to the hospital, and I was admitted to the mental health, and I was there for several days. And while I was there, they diagnosed me with PTSD. And I was somewhat relieved because all of a sudden there was a name to what I had, and I wasn't losing my mind. So that was kind of a relief to me. I knew I was done with EMS because you can't help others if you can't help yourself. You need to help yourself first. You need to make yourself a priority, make yourself your own number one patient. And so I moved up to South Dakota to be close to family, where I'd have some support while I went through therapy. And so I went through therapy, and I still go to therapy. I still see a doctor. That was 4 years ago. And I take meds, and I still have anxiety. I still have nightmares. I have insomnia. I have flashbacks every now and then, but I lead a normal life. I've learned to embrace who I am, and what PTSD is a part of me, but it doesn't define me. It's not who I am. And I've learned to move on and have a productive life and be happy. Just this morning, at 2:30 this morning, I was talking to somebody in crisis who was like, is there life after PTSD or after EMS? Because he has PTSD and he lost his job, and he just felt like it was the end. There's nowhere to go. And so we talked about what we're talking about now. And so I started a group called Project Hope EMS on Facebook. It's a support group, and a page. I started a page, and it's for first responders with PTSD. Because when I was going through my symptoms, I felt like I was all alone. I felt like I was the only one in the world going through it. And I reached out online for help, for statistics, for references, anything. And I couldn't find anything, no help at all. So I wanted to do something to help first responders, let them know that they're not alone, and that there is hope, and that there are others out there who are suffering in silence. You can pool together and discuss what you're going through and have a support group. So that'll be 3 years in September that I started that. And since then, we have 3 different groups for different things, and we have 2 pages and a website, and we're have over 36,000 members, and we're in over 51 different countries.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Eh,
awesome.
But you know, Steve, like I said, I was at my lowest low when I started this. I was running in auto mode. It's like somebody else was directing my body what to do. I give all the credit to God.
Absolutely.
Um, because I mean, he had to have a hand in it because I accidentally started it and it took off. In the beginning, it was 50 to 100 member requests a day. And I was just like, this is crazy. Isn't there support out there for people? And it just showed me what a need there was for it. But it's just grown, and I give him all the credit. You know, I'm just a regular guy. I don't know big words. Yeah,
Well, you were from EMS, right?
right. And, you know, I don't see myself as anything like a hard charger over, what do you call it, over achiever or anything like that. I really think it was all God that had a hand in it, and continues to have a hand in it. And that's my story.
Well, I think that's thank you for sharing that. That's a very very touching story, and I hope that people really listen. That's really the basis for this program. I haven't come from a background in a childhood with alcohol and substance abuse, and having survived childhood physical, mental, and sexual abuse. It kind of set me up. I think for troubles later on that I didn't fully understand. But I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and as you know, I spent nearly 30 years in the emergency medical service industry as a paramedic and a critical care flight paramedic, and as an entrepreneur. But some of the things that I didn't realize were affecting me, because again, it was things that were, maybe I had relational issues, or I didn't like to get out in big crowds, and it wasn't until later where I started having different triggers, and Ken, to be honest with you, I didn't even realize it when I had a gun in my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what was going on. All I knew is that I had a lot of pain that I couldn't cope with. For me, it very similar. Years of repetitive trauma combined with the trauma that I had endured as a child, I think came to a head, and it exhibited itself in many different ways. But for me personally, I think the biggest thing was guilt. I could hear the cries and the screams of a child screaming, "Wake up, Daddy, wake up." And I knew Daddy would never wake up and walk her down the aisle. I knew Daddy would never go to the dance. I knew that the person would never be there. Or to hear the desperate cries of a mother begging for you to save their child, and to live with the knowledge that I couldn't, and to blame myself, and to think that maybe I could have done more. To blame myself for not being able to give somebody back their loved one is a huge burden to carry around, and that was something that was really strong within me, and I continue to struggle with. I know in my heart that I did the best I could, and that nothing else could be done, but it still nags you. And then, as you mentioned, Ken, that you go to some very horrific scenes, and one of the strongest senses that relates to memory is the sense of smell.
Mm-hmm.
You combine some of the sights and the sounds and the smells, and they etch themselves into your memory, into your subconscious. And so that's where a lot of people, have triggers. And another of mine was avoidance. I avoided certain areas. If I was traveling through an area where there had been something that really touched me, I avoided the area. I avoided large crowds, and I did become hyper vigilant. But it affected me in other ways in my relationship, where I became a conflict avoider. That any type of conflict or negativity created such an anxiety inside me that I had a difficult time coping, and the way I coped with that was to shut it down.
Yeah.
I turned to anger very quickly, or that I just didn't communicate at all. And so it exhibited itself in different ways that at the time I didn't understand and nobody else understood.
Hmm.
And yet I continue in my own way to struggle with it, although I'm healed and by the grace of God, I continue to function normally, if you will. But you can't get rid of the memories. You can't get rid of the smells. Something that a sound that you hear. For me, it's screaming children. On a playground, I can pass by a playground and hear a little girl, screaming like they do, and it creates an anxiety inside me because maybe it ties back to a time when a child was trapped in a burning car, and I can still hear the screams. And so it'll cause those type of triggers. Even though I function and cope well, I think it's inevitable that something would affect you at some point in time. So again, I share this because I want responders to know that you may be doing okay right now, or you may think you're doing okay, but the first step in getting better, the first step in getting help, and the first step in your longevity and your career and your happiness is acceptance and acknowledgement that you may be having some troubles.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think that kind of takes us in, to the next section here, which is for those people who may recognize some of the signs and symptoms that we talked about. What do you do next?
Well, you need to get help. You need to have the signs and symptoms. Those are red flags, and you need to go to I'd start out with your family doctor and tell them what's going on. And then ultimately, you need to see a therapist, get diagnosed what you do have, and then they will probably start you on some medications to help you even out the roller coaster on some of the symptoms that you're having. But you have to reach out for help. You can't do it on your own. You just can't.
I'd even say the first step is being honest with yourself.
Hmm. And then, we have to ask ourselves, why don't we reach out for help?
I think that's an important topic, and why do you think that is?
Well, the stigma, and I had to look up stigma. I kept hearing about it in the beginning, stigma, stigma, and I was like, what is stigma? I don't understand it. And I looked up the definition of it, and it comes from the Greek language when soldiers would mark a slave or a criminal by cutting or branding them, marking them to be identified as a lower moral status.
Wow.
And so the bottom line, stigmatizing is to separate us from them.
Okay.
So we're afraid. We're afraid that what our peers are going to think. We're afraid that we're going to be taken off the truck. We're afraid we're going to lose our job. And sadly, some places that happens. But that's changing. Legislation is starting to change, and where PTSD is now workman's comp. So things are changing, but the stigma is we're afraid to come forward because we're afraid what other people are going to think or say.
Ken, I think one of the reasons why that's so important to us as individuals is this isn't a job for us. I didn't necessarily choose the career because I thought it was going to be exciting. I chose the career because I generally wanted to help people. It's not what we do, it's who we are.
Right.
And
It's a big part of you.
yeah, the threat and the risk of losing that in any way, I
Hmm.
think far outweighs our need to get help. But
Yeah, I agree.
but by the same token, reaching out and getting help will allow you to continue to help other people. Don't get so deep into this illness that there's no turning back.
And there's a lot of people who get help and go back to EMS or back to being a first responder. That's not, that's an obtainable goal. That's not,
Absolutely.
it's not a death sentence to have PTSD where your career is over with.
No, you learn new coping skills. You
Right,
once you get your cards out there on the table, you can actually deal with it in a
right.
healthy way.
Hmm. For me, that was a personal choice. I knew I had to leave. I could go back today, but with my age and my back, it's like, I don't think so. And
Well, what do you think that we can do within the industry to help ourselves and help each other and to raise awareness and to actually identify and treat more people?
we need to view mental injury as a normalcy, and we need to address mental health in the industry on a normal basis, just like you have regular training on different topics. Mental health should be part of your regiment as your training in your place of employment. One thing that this kind of comes to mind, community is defined as a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals.
Hmm.
So it's like, ask yourself, what kind of interest, goals, and attitudes does your community share? Does it share where it rejects mental health, or it puts people who have mental health issues at bay, which causes a stigma? Or are you guys embracing mental health? Because we all need mental health help at some point in time. And like I said, I see it changing. It's not changing fast enough. And then we need to be aware of our conversations. The stigma starts with us on what we say and how we view things and how we talk. We can change the stigma by changing how we talk about things and how we talk about a person and how we view a person. And that's where it starts, is with us, with you.
One of the things that I think is worth mentioning, and because we're talking about public safety industry, and when we talk about that, we think about the obvious, the EMTs and paramedics and the police and fire. But there are other people involved in this industry that are affected as well. Dispatchers,
Yeah.
the communications specialists have to deal with the stress of not, of trying to manage and coordinate these efforts, and they have to listen and hear these people on the telephone for extended periods of time until help arrives. That's very stressful.
Yeah, I couldn't do their job. There's no way.
And plus, you have to be able to multitask, which is definitely not in the top of my strengths at all. But the other people, that nurses and doctors and
Hmm.
techs in the ER.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, other folks that don't realize have to deal with this are the tow truck drivers that have to come haul away the wreckage of in the carnage that existed in the and they have to see some horrible things. They're just guys. Look, I haul cars for a living, and before you know it, they're out there having to deal with some pretty horrible things and sights and smells, and so there are other people that are affected by this industry that maybe are on the periphery, but nevertheless suffer traumas.
Yes. And it's funny you mentioned that. My oldest son worked as a tow truck driver, a wrecking truck or whatever, and he was telling me about the things that he's seen, and I couldn't believe it. I was just like, wow.
Exactly. So, I'd just like for folks to take a minute and recognize those folks. If you're someone who's affected, or if you're maybe a family member or a friend of someone like that, take a minute to do a buddy check. Check on your friends and have an open discussion and let them know it's okay. It's okay to talk about it. And if you identify some of these symptoms that may be out of character, or maybe something that somebody's been exhibiting for any length of time, have that discussion. And if they haven't come to that stage of acceptance, stage an intervention if necessary. But key is to be able to reach folks that are hurting inside before they get to that suicidal stage, before it's too late.
And even if they're not ready to have that conversation, you've planted that seed where you're approachable and they know they can come to you. Don't be afraid to what not to say, or the biggest thing is to be a good listener and listen to what they have to say. But if they're not ready to have that conversation, or they get angry and shut down, at least you planted a seed and they know that at least I can go talk to them if I have to or if I need to. And so that's important to remember.
I think the thing about listening that's important, and look, I've done this wrong. I've screwed it up before, where I have maybe a co-worker, somebody in the industry that may be trying to reach out, and I didn't recognize it, but I got too caught up in my own war stories and too caught up in kind of what I had struggled with to really be a good listener. And so listening is an active skill. Being an active listener means that you listen. And telling people who are hurting, kind of what you've been through and sharing those war stories doesn't make it better.
No.
And again, I've done it wrong, and I regret that, and I want to just let folks know, if somebody that's in the industry, if it's a partner of yours or a coworker or someone just listen.
Yeah, that's all they need, is somebody to listen to them.
Yeah. Well, Kent, I really thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your story and sharing some of these very, very important statistics. And I thank you for what you do with the Project Hope EMS and the many, many lives that you've touched and that I know you'll continue to touch. God bless you in your work and in your journey. And I hope you'll come on the show in the future.
Oh, yeah. It's been an honor to be here today. I really appreciate the invite.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Kent, thank you very much. And you guys, as listeners, again, Kent, would you want to share your Project Hope EMS website again?
Oh, yeah. It's www.projecthopeems.net. And it talks about the different groups and has all the information, tools and resources, things like that. So it's a good read. So go check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For my various symptoms, such as difficulty sleeping, feelings of anxiousness, aches and pains, and other issues, I take a high quality CBD, which has completely changed my life. I've been able to come off all my medications and can treat all my symptoms very, very effectively. But the key is finding a good quality CBD. If you want more general information about CBD and how it works, I recommend you visit projectcbd.org. And if you want a good quality, non-genetically modified, certified organic CBD with a 60-day empty bottle money-back guarantee, visit www.mycbd911.com. For any of you listeners in Central Texas, I recommend you visiting Four Legs of Love Boarding and Boutique, located in Temple, Texas. If you want to pamper your furry friends, a good doggy daycare, or even in-home care, or you want to pamper them with a CBD-infused spa bath, these are the folks for you. They also offer a variety of dog beds, accessories, treats, and much more. Visit these guys at gopetlove.com. That's gopetlov.com. Or you can contact them at 254-239-5307. That's Four Legs of Love Boarding and Boutique. These guys will treat your pets like their family.